Well, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today and to tell you about our research activity in the University of Trento. In particular, today we will talk about the so-called platform provenance analysis for digital images. So before starting, I would like to give you some light introduction to our team first. As Tian said, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Trento, and I work within the multimedia lab group that Tian knows very well. We met there a few years ago by now. The research group is part of the Department of Information Engineering and Computer Science in Trento, which is also very active in many fields in ICT. And I'm also part of a newly founded Center for Security Sciences and Criminology, which has been funded in conjunction with the University of Verona. So as you can see on the right, I'm lucky enough to work with a great team in Trento, led mainly by Professor Giulia Boato, but also encompassing other postdoc staff and PhD staff. We are quite active in the field of media forensics in general, and we are also supported by different funding schemes, including the Italian Ministry of Education, and also quite recently by DARPA through artificial intelligence actions in the last couple of years. So after this brief, let's say, institutional introduction, let's go a bit more to the content of this presentation. And well, first, before going into more details, I would like to give a brief framework of what multimedia forensics is in short, in a nutshell. So we can say that, well, forensic sciences in general, when it comes to technology at least, are somehow split into what is the analog forensic, which is still pretty used for some application, which deals mainly with physical evidences. Digital forensics deals with everything that is digital evidence, so that is essentially represented as a finite sequences of discrete and perfectly observable symbols. Most likely what digital forensics deals with are essentially digitization of parts of the reality. That's what happens, for instance, with media data, so with content, with images and videos. So within a digital forensic, let's say, the field, there's a well-established branch given by computer forensic, which is really mostly focused on the computer engineering part, while the multimedia forensic is somehow a branch of that, a sub-branch of the digital forensic, which specifically deals with media data. This includes images, this includes videos. This in principle includes audio as well, although we are mostly focusing in our research at least on images and videos. Okay, so in order to give a further overview of, let's say, the field of study, multimedia forensics entails a number of different sub-problems, and let's say that the number of sub-problems increases in time together with technology for manipulation and for creations. So one of the main track in this case is the detection of manipulation, of forgeries, of tampering within media data.
Are you running slide, or you are still using something, because we only see your first slide, the title only?
Okay, I'm using. So you're still seeing the first slide?
Yes.
Okay, that's a pity, because I changed several slides in the meantime. Yeah, let me try to use another program. I'm using Acrobat, so I suppose that it was sharing. So let me try another. That's very weird.
Okay.
Now you can see,
yes,
right? Okay, well, I'll keep it not in full screen then, so hopefully,
no.
I hope that you can, sorry?
Now back to the PDF file.
Okay. Okay, that was the presentation slide that I was talking on about. So that's the people you can see on the right. That's the description of where multimedia forensics is framed, let's say, within the forensic sciences. And that was actually the slides, the current slides I was talking on. I can also share the slides after the talk, so if you're interested. So as I was saying, the sub-problems in multimedia forensics are quite varied, in the sense that they varied over time, and they of course increase together with advances of technology. So one of the main track that has been explored widely in the last, I would say, 15 years is the passive detection of manipulation over the signals. This can entail processing that can be considered legitimate or illegitimate according to the specific application scenario. So that what is, let's say, fine or what is wrong in manipulating a certain signal depends on the application scenario. But within this framework, within this problem, there are several techniques and several manipulations that can be detected, and in turn several techniques that can be applied. It is interesting, for instance, to detect whether an image, let's say, it's been compressed more than once. We all know that images are usually transmitted in compressed format. The most used one is the JPEG. And it is interesting to understand whether a certain signal, it is somehow natively compressed at a certain moment in time, or other previous compressions occurred in advance, in order to essentially assess the authenticity of this file as a proof of evidence. And yeah, maybe all of us more or less played a bit with some editing software, some Photoshop stuff, and we all know that modern software offers a lot of tools to modify images also in a very realistic way. So anything that regards like copy and moving a certain part within the signal is something that can be addressed and detected through signal processing techniques, as well as splicing operations, which can be semantically very, very impactful, like adding an object or a person, or removing an object or a person into a scene. Something that kind of emerged in the last years is the problem of detecting content that is not only manipulated from existing one, but also fully synthetic. Okay, something that is either generated by computer graphics. That's something that was particularly relevant up to a few years ago. What is way more relevant in the last years, it's the detection of well, you might have heard the word deepfakes these days. So everything that is essentially synthesized completely or even partially through the help of AI, which really helps in speeding up essentially these processes, automating these processes, and making them accessible to a wider public. So this is let's say, the last frontiers of the last years. Within these kind of technologies, of course, the most, let's say, evidence are the ones that pertains to the depicting faces, or depicting humans, talking like I'm doing now. But let's remember that essentially advances in AI are more and more enabling also the synthesis of arbitrary scenes. So we're not talking only about the so-called deepfakes and Tom Cruise deepfakes and so on, but we are really talking about fully synthetic creation of scenes that most likely will be possible in the next few years. So from this, with this regard, it is important to have on the other side tools that can suggest that they can indicate whether some kind of content has been completely synthesized. Another important problem that has been explored very widely in the last years is essentially the identification of the acquiring source of a certain data. So we have an image, for instance, and we want to identify or determine whether an image comes from a certain device or from a certain camera model, in order, of course, to use it in investigative, different kind of application, including investigation. It is digital investigations. This is done through a number of signal processing techniques that are essentially able to represent and characterize the fingerprint left by single sensors on the data that they acquire. This holds also for hardware, not only for different kind of hardware, like there have been quite a lot of research on detecting scanned documents rather than photograph documents and so on. What has been emerging in the last years, and which is actually the focus of this talk, we are getting close, is the so-called provenance analysis, in the sense that we have a certain data, in our case would be mainly digital images, and we're not particularly interested, or not only interested in the kind of device it was used for the acquisition, but also on the digital history that this image has, also in terms of sharing into sharing platforms or social networks. The so-called provenance or platform provenance analysis exactly deal with this scenario. So if we want to have a simplified view of that, we can say that the acquisition process essentially. Can you see my mouse, right? My pointer.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the acquisition step is the process that essentially bring us from a real scene into a digitized version. This digitized data can be subject to post-processing of any kind, manipulation, that includes also manipulations and so on, but even slighter processing like recompression, resizing, cropping, and so on. And this is essentially this part of the pipeline is essentially the part that has been most widely investigated by research in multimedia forensics. What is actually very interesting, much more interesting, especially in the last years, is this second part of the pipeline where data are not only acquired but also uploaded or shared. We will use these terms interchangeably in this talk, into some kind of platform that includes websites, blogs, social networks, and so on. So once essentially the data comes into the web, essentially, then there's a number of different steps that can follow that could include multiple sharing, downloads and re-uploads from users and so on. Also, in this phase, there can be a combination with other kind of information, because images in the webs or video in the webs are used usually in combination with text. So the whole object that, in fact, one needs to analyze when dealing with this kind of information is a text, potentially a text part, but mostly a media object that has underwent different steps. Okay, so I try to exemplify what is the classical, let's say, forensic analysis corresponding to the purple color that essentially deals with this first part of the pipeline. Then the platform provenance analysis deals differently from the previous one on this second part of the pipeline. So the goal is really to study what happens here, essentially. While the techniques that entails not only the analysis of media, but also the analysis of text, let's say, pertain to the wider, let's say, field of multimodal verification analysis, which is also something that, from a research point of view, needs to be further explored, because it can really lead to great synergies. So what we're talking today is essentially the yellow part. So everything that concerns analyzing a shared media object, trying to infer information on this phase of the pipeline. How it is done? Well, it is done by observing that, and why is so different from the conventional forensic and multimedia forensics analysis? Because sharing signals, so sharing data, media data, has an impact on the signals, in the sense that there are different parts of the object that are modified. Well, first there's a categorical part, a metadata part that is modified. Usually the name, of course, of the resulting file when you upload and then download something is different, can give you some hints. The size of the resulting file is usually modified, because essentially platforms wants to save bandwidth and storage, so that the kind of operations that are applied on images are mostly encompass recompression and resizing. So there's a number of changes that can be observed in metadata. So the EXIF fields are modified. Usually they are stripped out, so that the minimum metadata are usually left when an upload occurs. And in general, the structure of the resulting container, the resulting file container, can be changed together with the information related to compression parameters, because, as I was saying, a recompression operation is very likely in these cases. So before going into more detail, I want to briefly recall how JPEG compression works, because it's a core part of the research we're carrying out for these purposes. So essentially, JPEG JPEG format entails a signal compression. So starting from a certain image, the image gets essentially partitioned in smaller blocks of 8 by 8 pixels. On these blocks, there's a discrete cosine transform that is applied on each of them, and this operation is essentially a change of basis in the representation of the image. So we want to represent the image content in a way for which essentially the coefficient multiplying a certain kind of basis can be discarded, so we can essentially save memory. If we represent naturally, let's say, before any compression, this is how the collection of these like multiplicative coefficients that define the content of the image looks like. The core of the JPEG compression is quantizing these values, which means that this histogram turns into that histogram according to a certain step, okay? And after that, there's a number of parts of steps that includes lossless encoding, which essentially means we want to save the image in a smarter way. But the core of the lossy JPEG compression is exactly this mathematical operation. Those quantization steps, so the width, essentially the distance between these the different bins of the histogram, are contained in the quantization table, and which essentially contains 64 of these different values. And this table of 64 values determine essentially the resulting image quality. So when we discuss about JPEG compression quality, we're referring to quantization tables that are expressed by a single quantization factor. Okay, so the quality of the image depends on this parameter. This is what regards the signal part. When we also analyze not only the signal extracted by the JPEG file, but also the overall container of the file, we can also there find interesting information. In fact, the file header of the JPEG file is structured in different segments. Different segments are indicated by markers, which corresponds essentially to different kind of information that is listed in the header. Examples of markers names are the ones, for instance, reported here. I don't want to go into too much in technical details, but the message is that there are different kinds of different denominations of these markers, and how these markers are ordered and displayed make the difference in how the JPEG file is represented. Just to give you an example, we here have some examples of the impact of sharing operations on different kind of signals. So we start from a native image, which means that it has been natively acquired, let's say before any sharing operation, with a certain resolution and with a certain value of the quantization table. By the way, this quantization table containing only ones essentially corresponds to the highest possible quality in the JPEG compression. It means that we are really quantizing very slightly our signal. What happens when this image is shared through Facebook and then downloaded? Well, first you can see that the size changes. So the image gets essentially shrinked of a certain factor. And apparently the signal gets further recompressed because if we extract the quantization parameter from the current JPEG file, the downloaded JPEG file, we observe that the quantization table is radically different from the first one. So there's this kind of operation. Something similar happens when I share it through Flickr, for instance, in the sense that the size, the image gets resized in the same way, but get compressed with a different factor. Okay, so the resizing behaves quite similar, but the quality level of the recompression is different. Where we use another platform like Twitter, we see that the resizing here is quite strong in the sense that it's basically halved. The size of the resolution of the image is basically halved. And again, we find yet another quantization table. Something similar happens for other data. We did the same with another different image, and using also different platforms. For instance, here we used WhatsApp, where we see that there's a resizing and there's also recompression. Here we use Telegram, where there is a resizing because the image is smaller. There's also recompression for sure, because if you resize, then you have to recompress again, but with the very same parameter as before. So the recompression is the same. Through Messenger, yet another case. So all this to say what? That if we consider images, data that have been uploaded and downloaded, we see that this kind of operation impacts strongly the performance of let's say conventional multimedia forensic detectors. Like for instance, the analysis of the sensor fingerprints is a bit hindered by that. The analysis, the detection of local manipulation gets harder because there's yet another layer of processing. So it's harder to get back to the inconsistencies generated by a possible splicing, for instance. But this offers also other opportunities for which regards essentially the reconstruction of a digital history of this image. In fact, we have observed that essentially there are patterns in the way platforms operate on images. What we have seen in the previous slide is something that can typically be generalized to significant amounts of different images. So what we did, the methodology, what it did is to try to automate this visual inspection that we just did before through supervised machine learning. So the question is, can we use the automated classifier in order to help us supporting decisions on the digital history of an image under investigation? This includes different tasks for these supervised classifiers. That includes, for instance, the identification of what is the last platform that has processed the object. So imagine we have an image under investigation, and the first thing you want to know is whether, and in case, which platform it came from, at least in its last step. So once this is done, a further step is to reconstruct what happened before. So if there have been previous compressions with respect through other platforms, and something also interesting that can be done under certain circumstances is the extraction of information on the kind of systems used in the upload phase. So not only information on the specific data, but also information in general on the system used for the uploading phase. So this has been done through this general pipeline. So first, we need to create a data set, a data corpus that is representative enough and is big enough in order to train automated classifiers. Then we need to select specific cues, specific features that will be used for the supervised classification. And in this case, we have seen that we can use both features based on the signal, so on the content on the image, but also features based on the metadata, and combine them. Of course, if you use signal, this generally entails pre-processing operation, like for instance, we're not extracting directly the pixels, but we are transforming the pixels into the DCT domain because it is related to the JPEG compression. So when we consider both of this kind of data, we end up not only with numerical but also with categorical data that needs to be fused together. Fused together in a training phase, where different kind of supervised classifiers can be used, ranging from subtree vector machines to random forest, to logistic regressors, up to deep neural networks, provided that there's enough data for that. There's a favorable configuration for that. After this, we get a machine learning classifier out, a trained machine learning classifier out, which is then ready to be used in the inference phase, where we have new data to be analyzed. In a nutshell, I want to give you an idea on how our features are structured. So we use content information first in the form of histograms of the DCT coefficients, the one that we have seen before. So essentially, how these data are distributed over a number of different frequencies. This leads to a vector of around 400 elements. And then from the container, we extract two kind of cues. The first, what we call meta in the following slides, pertain to essentially to the settings of the JPEG compression, in the sense that we extract quantization tables. We extract Huffman encoding tables that are used in the lossless compression part. We extract flags which indicates essentially whether some modalities in the compression have been used or not, like progressive compressions or optimized coding. And we also incorporate the size of the image in this case, leading to 150 cues, more or less. Finally, and that's something we researched in the last months, we also extract additional information from the header. So those are essentially metadata that can be extracted by manually or promptly by ready tools. While this part, the extraction of these features, entails really a parsing of the JPEG header in order to identify where are the markers that can be of interest, the markers that I've been discussing before. And in this phase, so the markers get identified and counted, and ends up essentially in a feature of age values counting whether a certain kind, how many times a certain kind of marker appear in the header. Just to give you some other background, those markers are, while these metadata are quite easy to interpret, those markers are quite, let's say, hard to interpret for non-expert users, in the sense that we really go into the structure of the file, and there's no apparent meaning in the order they appear or in the quantity they appear. Everything depends on the degrees of freedom that the JPEG standard leaves in their implementation, essentially. And then we consider an experimental use case where we created a data set that contains images that has been shared once, twice, or 3 times through different kind of platforms. In particular, we considered Facebook, we considered Twitter and Flickr. All of them, so the sharing with this operation have been repeated once, twice, or 3 times. So essentially, this leads to this these trees of different possibilities, where the idea is that when we have an image under investigation here, we want to retrieve essentially the right path of this graph that corresponds to the actual compression sharing history of the image under investigation. So if an image came from Twitter up to Facebook, we want to be able to reconstruct correctly this path. So just for the sake of notation, we will use this notation to indicate like first sharing with Twitter, then with Flickr, and then with Facebook. While when we reconstruct, we go essentially backward. So first we try to identify the first platform, and then possibly the last platform, and then possibly the one before. So the way we construct our system, our multi-step reconstruction system, is divided, as I was saying, in different steps. So we have the image under investigation. We apply a first classifier, which is able to sort out what is the last sharing platform for a specific image. For instance, I'm giving this image X, then this function maps me to Facebook as a last sharing platform. And then here I try to go even backward and trying to apply specialized classifiers that we have properly trained according to the whole design of the system, that can tell me whether this image was actually only have been shared once. So in this case, the reconstruction would stop here, or whether other sharing happened before. So in this case, in this example, for instance, this F-1, because essentially we are going backward of one step, tells me that there have been a sharing with Twitter before. And then again, here I try to go even backward and apply another specialized classifier, which is in this case F-2, which is going backward, which again should tell me whether I should stop here or going even farther. In this case, the reconstruction is stopped at this stage. Just to give you an idea of what's inside this overall system, essentially each of these specialized classifier entails a fusion module of 3 different classifiers, because each of them deals with a specific feature vector. So essentially each of the step needs to be trained for the different feature domains. And then those domains are fused in a fusion engine system. In particular, we use the behavior knowledge space, which is essentially a way to count what is the most probable outcome among a certain number of classes, provided the results of individual classifiers. So essentially, this is done for the first step, and the results is passed to the following steps. Again, we have 3 different classifiers fused, which gives us another answer. Possibly, we can even go further to another F-2 step. In order to have a better idea of what the kind of data that we're actually dealing with, this is a representation of essentially the JPEG header that has been extracted from a single image, and this is the part that is essentially parsed, and we parsed from the stream of from the bit stream. Here I'm reporting essentially the different different distributions of these different markers present in the JPEG header under different hypotheses. So for instance, when the image is shared on Facebook, let's say once, the number of markers identified as DHT is quite high, is generally 23. While when the image comes from Flickr, the numbers of such kind of markers decrease to 8 or something like this. And this reflects also in other typology of markers that we have selected. This is really to have a grasp of the difference that can be extracted from the JPEG headers under different circumstances. And let's go to results, and let's go to see how this overall system performed on the data set. Let's focus on the first step. So when we're trying to essentially disambiguate between 3 different branches, the main 3 different branches, we obtain that the distinction in this case is essentially perfect. It is perfect, I would say, in the sense that there's probably a rounding. Maybe one or 2 images gets misclassified, and then the rounding gets up to 100. But it is certainly clear from this experiment that it is possible to have a first sort out of this of the provenance of for the last sharing platform. This holds relatively also for the second step. So I've identified the branch, and I want to go backward. This entails essentially a total number of 12 classes, where here are all the ones that are finishing with Facebook. Here are all the ones that are finishing with the Flickr, and then we have Twitter. So what we would expect ideally in this case is a diagonal, in the sense that this is a confusion matrix, which represents the classification accuracy for each different pair of tool chains. Okay, this 78 means that 78 of images shared through Facebook once are correctly classified, assigned to this kind of tool chain, and the same happens for other tool chains. Also, we can observe that in the case of Twitter, we observe problems in the sense that there are misclassification in this area, and then we will see how this reflects also on the bigger system. I think I can go farther. When we extend up to the last step, we obtain a total of 39 classes, which starts to be a bigger classification problem. Ideally, we would expect a full diagonal. We can somehow identify a diagonal along this confusion matrix. But if we also go into details into the topology of this matrix, what we observe is that most of the errors or the misclassification errors are related to tool chains, to sharing chains that includes Twitter. Further than that, we have difficulty in disambiguating the first sharings, in the sense that something that has been shared with Flickr and Facebook, but before was shared again on Facebook or on Flickr, gets essentially confused. And also we have difficulty in disambiguating identical sharing. Like for instance, Twitter, Flickr gets mapped to Flickr, Twitter, Flickr, or essentially this identical resharing gets interpreted as a single share, which is something that we could expect in the sense that if a platform has processed certain data once and finds again in the upload phase the same kind of data, most probably the impact, the operation that it will do on the specific image will be an identity function. I think I can go directly to the discussion of some open issues that comes along with these results on this kind of studies, which I think could be very useful for investigative approaches, and especially I think they could be very useful when used in synergy, maybe with the retrieval techniques that deals not only with media data but also with text. The first problem is that somehow these approaches are purely data-driven, are purely inductive, and there's no theoretical models behind. It is hard to draft theoretical models for this kind of applications. This of course entails that so we have supervised methods, completely data-driven. It means that we constantly need data in order to train and update these tools. What we also noticed is that there's a variability in the different upload and download pipelines that can be used. In the sense that if I'm uploading a picture from my smartphone or from my desktop WhatsApp application, the way images are processed can be different. And can be different probably due to the different kind of libraries that are used by different devices, by different operating systems. And this also makes somehow hard to identify what are the characterizing points in specific upload pipelines that leads to these detectable traces. Last but not least, the collection of this data can be very time consuming, in the sense that there are ways to at least semi-automate the collection of the uploading and the downloading phase. But in order to get a significant amount of data, there is also a significant amount of time to be devoted to that. But this is also the reason why I mean there have been the research on this kind of use cases have been hindered for several years. I think I'm running out of time, and I would conclude here my talk. I hope that I gave you interesting, at least, insights of what's happening on our side. And of course, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer to your questions.